Hello, and welcome to our weekly devotion where we share this one thing from our Revised Common Lectionary for Sunday, March the 27th. My name is Pam Masten. I'm one of the associate pastors here at First Presbyterian Church of Fort Lauderdale, and thank you so much for joining me today. The Revised Common Lectionary for Sunday serves up a familiar parable from Luke's Gospel, the parable of the lost son. A few years ago, I was a character in a true-to-life story akin to the parable of the lost son. It was 7:30 in the morning and the pager went off. Stat, ICU, room 6. Thankfully, I was in the hospital already, so I ran to the ICU and found the transport team getting ready to take the patient to the OR. The patient had requested a chaplain before going into surgery. Apparently, the patient had tripped over his dog and broke his hip, and while the surgery was not emergent, he also had some comorbidities, which made the surgery complicated and timely. Now, this was not unusual. Patients requested prayer often before surgery. They may be anxious, the operation may be risky, and they just want the assurance that the great physician is on board. But this patient said, when I arrived, "Chaplain, I need to talk with the chaplain before going to the OR." So there I was, ready to pray, and the patient said, "I need you to contact my son. He's lost. He's estranged for a few years. He's been estranged, and he works for Parks and Rec in a town nearby. His name is John Doe. Please tell him I forgive him and I love him. Please tell him I forgive him and I love him." I quickly assured the patient I would do my best to contact his son. The patient said, "Okay, now you can pray." We prayed and he went off to surgery. I called his son and relayed the message. In our passage today from Luke chapter 15, Jesus shares a parable about the lost son. In our story, there were two sons. One was faithful, hard worker. The younger son was not that interested in working and asked his dad for his share of the estate. The father agreed, and the younger son went off to live the good life, as they say. What a life he had, a dream come true. But if it's too good to be true, it probably is, and sure enough, the money ran out. After a couple of failed job opportunities, the young son got the bright idea to go back home and ask his father to hire him as one of his hired men. The young son realized he had sinned and asked for mercy. And we know that the father welcomed and hugged his returning wayward son. A party was even thrown in celebration of the young son's return. It was a grand reunion, and the father and son were reconciled. The young son was once lost, but now was found. Although a parable in Luke chapter 15, we know this happens in real life. Maybe you know someone in your family who has been welcomed back into the fold. Maybe you have reconciled with a parent, a child, a neighbor, or friend. Friends, no matter what kind of sin we are living with, it always leads to loss. Sin equals loss, loss of peace, loss of appreciation for God's gifts to us, loss of personal relationships with God and others. Did you notice that in the parable, the father welcomed his son back and restored the relationship? Do you think the young son deserved forgiveness? Probably not. But yet the father willingly and graciously said, "I forgive you and I love you. You are my son and I love you." During the season of Lent, friends, why not focus on what God has given us rather than focusing on wanting something else? And if we have strayed and gone our own way looking for greener pastures, let's get back on track. Are there relationships in your life that need reconciliation, restoration, or realignment with God's will as we journey to the cross? The parable of the lost son points to the sovereign love of God. who actively seeks out sinners. And like the Father's loving response to the undeserving younger son, God's forgiveness is not a reward for good works, but is entirely the gracious gift of our Lord. And that, my friends, is good news. Oh, and the surgery was successful. The broken hip was repaired. The son was lost, but now was found. And by evening, the son was at the bedside with his father. Mercy upon mercy upon mercy. Thanks be to God. Thanks so much for joining me today. Friends, stay healthy, and we'll see you on Sunday.